Welcome, Jessie. I'm really excited to talk to you all about matrescence and that massive shift that happens when we become mothers. But before we begin, can you tell us one thing that you've done today to take care of you?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you for that. Oh, my friend, I have done some things already today. It's not always the case, but I had about 7 minutes to shower this morning and I did. And so that was anybody who's familiar with the rush to get children out the door off to school. It's not usually a time when I get a hot minute to take care of myself, but I did. I chose to do that instead of running around after children for 7 minutes this morning. So that was one of the couple of things I've done so far today for myself.
That's a great one. And the things don't have to be massive, right? You don't have to take like an hour-long shower and bath or meditate for 30 minutes. It's those 7 minutes for you that you're like prioritizing yourself. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
How old are your kids?
My kids are 9 and almost 13.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do?
Sure. Yeah. I am a doula and a coach, and I support women through radical life transformations. So big changes in their lives. And that work for me started when I began my doula practice. It was 17 years ago, I'm realizing. And in the process of supporting new mothers, um, through kind of what we typically think of as the doula's role in sort of that prenatal and early postpartum time, I also started to notice that the mothers that I was working with were having other parts of their lives change tremendously as they became mothers. And that became my interest, is sort of like, how does motherhood change us? And then how do all of the transformations that we go through in our lives change us?
Yeah, motherhood is one of the biggest transitions that we go through, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, totally.
So, how did you end up working as a doula? What interested you initially? Because that would have been before you had your own kids. From a
Yeah.
lot of doulas that I know, some start before they have kids, but a lot of them seem to get into it after they've experienced birth themselves. What was it for you?
Yeah. Well, it's a kind of a funny story. I often look back and think, wow, there must have been some kind of other power or force that was at play in my life, because it was a very kind of an unlikely set of circumstances. I was in a master's program and I was about to graduate into the recession back in 2008. And I was pretty concerned that I wasn't going to be able to find a job. And um, I was at a party at the time. I was a professional scuba diver, and so I was at a party with a bunch of other scuba divers, which was sort of like my jam back then. And there happened to be someone there who was the daughter of one of the guests who was a doula, and we were, drinking boxed wine, and she was telling me a little bit about what she did, and I thought, that might be a good kind of backup plan if this whole master's degree doesn't work out. And I mean, I'm sure anybody who is or has tried to make a living as a doula is probably smiling right now, because it's not an easy way. It's not a great backup plan for a master's degree, but there you have it. That's what happened. And I happen to live in a city where there has been a volunteer doula program here for, gosh, probably 30 years now. So doulas in the place that I live were actually, very well known and respected in the hospital, very well integrated into our birthing systems. And so it was easy for me to train to be a doula and start doing that work. And I started doing that work as a volunteer for probably 5 or 6 years. And yeah, you're right. Most birth workers become birth workers either because they've had a really hard birth experience or a really great birth experience, and they either want to prevent the hard things from happening or help the good things to happen. And yeah, that's not how I came about it. It was boxed wine at a party and a very random meeting.
Yeah, something must have just happened, and that's really exciting for that to like you never know when those huge aha moments or ideas just start to become part of your life, right? And shape things so differently.
Yeah, totally.
So, what is matrescence? This is a word that I wish I had known when I became a mother. I
Mhm.
wrote 3 books on becoming a mother. And then after that, I learned this word, and I really wished I had learned about it before. I think it would have helped me in a lot of ways to understand it. Can you talk to us about matrescence?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, you're right. Matrescence is a word that we're using now, and it was coined originally in about 1975, I think, by an anthropologist named Dr. Dana Raphael. And she was the first one to kind of describe this rite of passage, this transformation into motherhood in sort of terms that we were not definitely not using at the time and only have just started to kind of understand that the postpartum time, the time after you have a baby, is more than just, healing your perineum and having, emotional roller coasters, right? That there's more beyond maybe that 6 week mark that we kind of talk about, or the 3 month mark that we're increasingly talking about the fourth trimester. Um, and Dr. Raphael's research kind of went underground, wasn't really picked up until about 10, 15 years ago. And so our use of the term matrescence is increasing. And um, it refers to kind of like the complete transformation of motherhood. So it's biological, physiological, it's psychological, it's sociological, it's economic, it's, the entire ecosystem of our lives is transformed by the fact of our motherhood. And so matrescence is this word that we get to use now to kind of encompass and recognize and validate the experience that we've been having, since the dawn of time, since the dawn of humanity, literally, right? And so I think, having this word has been really supportive and beneficial for people who were kind of going through this change, either thinking they were alone or thinking they were broken in some way. We have a culture that really deifies the idea of getting back to your pre-motherhood self, and that, the worst thing that could happen is that you might lose yourself in motherhood. And matrescence, they say it sounds like adolescence for a reason, right? It's a kind of a parallel, it's an adjacent experience of utter transformation. And we don't expect adolescents to return to their child selves. In fact, we think that that's not great at all, right? We expect them to grow and mature and change and become adults in the process. And so matrescence is a nod to this transformation as being what we would call a developmental process. And so the idea is that when we're well supported, we might grow and mature as human beings through this process. So that's a little, I mean, I could talk all day about matrescence, but hopefully that's a little overview for folks listening who might be new to the word.
Yeah, I do really like how it is similar to adolescence and how you say that when we look at adolescence, developmentally, we want them to then progress through that and transform into becoming adults and not go revert back to children, right? And childhood. Yet mothers, we have such different expectations on them. We don't want them to change as a global society, right? And we want them to stay the same and bounce back to what they were. And I think all of those unhelpful societal beliefs can really confuse mothers that you are changing, you are going through this, and yet we are supposed to, by society standards, not have those changes and still have the same priorities, interests, values. identity that we had before. It's entirely unhelpful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of like a particular kind of societal gaslighting, isn't it? Like, you shouldn't have changed. You're not changing. While our lived experience is usually, yeah, completely transformed.
So why do you think our society is like that? Because if this has been something that it's changing our brain, it's changing every aspect of our lives, and it always has. It's not that this is a new thing that's happening to mothers. Why does our society tell us otherwise?
Hmm. I think this is a great question. And maybe I want to preface it by saying that the particular experience that modern, maybe Western mothers go through in matrescence is different than it perhaps has always been. We've got mothers who, I think it's about 30% of mothers now are reporting experiencing birth trauma, and many of those PTSD. Many mothers have gone through a birth that's highly interventive, and we know that there are certain interventions in birth that deeply impact postpartum hormone balance, and therefore, that whole transition to motherhood becomes impacted. We've got social policies that, you know, ask us really to deny the fact of our motherhood by not offering enough maternity leave and not offering affordable childcare. We've got social media, like, don't even get me started. I think it's probably self-explanatory. So there's a lot of ways in which our modern day experience of matrescence is quite unique to what it would have been for our foremothers. So yes, it has always been transformative, and there are certain aspects of it that are really tough, actually. It's really tough to become a mother in our culture. And so I want to recognize that. And, earlier when I said that we kind of, you know, kind of deify that sort of pre-motherhood self and sort of make it wrong to lose yourself in motherhood, there's nuance there. There's a certain amount of losing yourself in motherhood that has always been the truth of this rite of passage, because it's always asked us to kind of surrender our own agenda for a little while at least, to care for our children. And then there's also aspects of our modern motherhood experience where we might lose ourselves because of the incredibly unfair and unjust conditions under which we're becoming mothers. So I do want to kind of make that delineation. And now I feel like I've strayed from your original question. Um, what was the original question?
Why does our society
Yeah.
convey this idea that we like shouldn't change even though
Yeah.
like we always have? And I think those points that you brought up there are so valid and really important. So thank you for doing so.
Yeah, totally. I think there's something to do with the fact that we, in on one hand, we deify mothers, right? We say that mothers know best, and we give this kind of like, I don't know, this hallmark version of motherhood, a lot of time and attention, at least on Mother's Day, right? But um, on the other hand, we really dismiss motherhood. We devalue motherhood in our culture. That's evident in the kind of facts of our society that make it so challenging to be a mother. And so I think there's something to that. Um, and I write in my book that, yeah, in many ways, becoming a mother in our culture is thought of as sort of a demotion of power and privilege and possibility. And so, like, of course, we fight that, both in our individual experiences and culturally. Of course, we insist that motherhood shouldn't change us.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. As an individual, yeah, you would, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Even though it is changing you. How do you recommend that we start to value mothers? I personally think that we have to individually start really feeling valued in the work that we do and the roles that we do, and that takes a lot of effort. And if we do that as a group of mothers, that can eventually shift how society views mothers. But are there other ways that we can start to shift this on a bigger scale and actually value mothering and value this transitional time?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think you're exactly right in the sense that there's sort of there's scales at which this needs to happen. And at the, larger sociocultural scale, I've already kind of spoken to some like social policy pieces that can support mothers and like community supports and really tangible ways in which we acknowledge the challenges that motherhood presents for us. We don't offer the kind of postpartum support that so many mothers would benefit from. I think there's something here about, it's not just a policy thing, but it's sort of a cultural like zeitgeist, I guess, that this culture of hyper individualism that we hold um, kind of keeps us isolated as mothers. The idea is that you raise your child on your own, essentially, within the confines of a nuclear family. We don't have, and I'll say I'm painting with a pretty wide brush here. There's obviously, a lot of nuance in terms of how different cultural groups value community. Um, within them, but I think particularly like the white Western experience is that of the loss of the village. And that's not a policy change and that's not an individual piece. It's this thing that it's this nut I haven't quite cracked yet in my own life because we all have to agree somehow that interdependence is valuable and that we can't go it on our own and that you should make a little extra soup and drop it off to your neighbor. Like, how do we make that kind of change? It probably happens both at the individual level and at the wider cultural level. And I think that would make a huge difference. And what's interesting about that is that motherhood actually um, in this developmental process, one of the skills and capacities that we develop typically, particularly in a well-supported matrescence experience, is the skill of understanding interdependence and really understanding um, the idea that someone else's needs might be put before your own. And I know we can talk about that endlessly in motherhood because there's a lot of nuance there. But I think in our hyper individualistic culture, one of the reasons why it's so hard to become a mother is because we're asked to decenter ourselves. We're asked to decenter our own autonomy and sovereignty and ambitions and goals and all of the things that capitalism tells us are the worst things you could ever do, right? Um, and so I think there's this sort of cultural movement towards community mindedness. And matrescence opens us up to that. That is a developmental skill within this process that we recognize interdependence. So we're kind of primed to build community in a lot of ways. And so, how do we support that? I'm not sure entirely. It's like, I feel like there's, yeah, these grassroots movements that are happening. And also, things like policies like increased maternity leave, for example, would actually allow people to spend time connecting in their communities.
Yeah, absolutely. I had my kids in Australia and I'm originally from Canada. And it was really interesting that with maternity leave there, it was a lot shorter than it is in Canada. But everybody went back, not everybody, but the majority of my friends who were moms went back to work part-time. Even
Mhm.
teachers who generally here work full-time. So that was not that they don't have their own issues there, but that was a helpful piece that they could still transition in motherhood and still lean into that role and hold on to some aspects of their identity that they had before. Whereas all my friends in Canada, they had a black or white option. You either stay home full time or you go back to work, but there seemed to be no in between. And I wonder even if things like that might help to not necessarily create community and all those changes, but it might just be one piece that could help.
Totally. I'll never forget. I was working, and so after I graduated with my master's degree and I was moonlighting as a doula on the side, got pregnant with my second child, and my husband was deployed overseas for 6 months. I had a toddler and was very pregnant. And I worked in public health. I should preface that. And normally had a pretty like chill workplace. They had just instituted this policy where, you had to have your bum in your chair from 9 to 5, like for whatever hours that you had established for yourself. And somebody would come around with a clipboard and make sure you were there. And I think things have changed post-COVID, but this was the situation like 9 years ago. And I was really struggling, like really, really struggling. It was probably one of the darkest times of my life. And ever the Capricorn, I was kind of trying to figure out, okay, what can I do to support myself? And I thought the one thing that would really help is if I could move my body on a regular basis, because I was solo parenting and working full time. It was really hard for me to find some time to do that. And I thought, well, maybe I'll ask to take an hour for lunch 3 days a week, tack an extra half an hour onto the end of my day. So I'll still be working the same number of hours so that I can go to the pool and swim. And I asked my supervisor if that would be a doable thing. And she said no. Like, it just shocks me. And I tried to make her understand, like, I'm solo parenting. I need to do something for my body. I need to stay healthy. I'm not in a great place right now. The answer was no. And so you're right. I think there's a lot of, and again, this has changed post-COVID, but in many ways it hasn't for many workers, many people. Even just, you're right, like seemingly simple workplace policies that allow a little bit more flexibility. And just, I often find myself saying, like, our work culture, our general culture asks us to deny the fact of our motherhood in order to participate in capitalism. And it's just not tenable for most of us.
No, it really isn't. So you talk about how this transition, this period of becoming a mother and matrescence takes 2 to 3 years rather than those 6 months, or sorry, 6 weeks or 3 months that we hear about. Why is it that it takes that long? What
Yeah, good question. It was funny. So when I got pregnant with, or before I got pregnant with my eldest child, I met the woman who would become my doula, and I heard her speak at an event for birth workers, and she was the one that I first heard say that the transition to motherhood, we didn't have the word matrescence then, the transition to motherhood takes 2 to 3 years. And at the time, it just felt like the biggest permission slip. Like you could interpret that as being kind of scary, like, oh God, this is gonna take a while. Um, but it felt like a big permission slip to, screw it up, to like be confused, to not know who I am or where I'm going, maybe even to regret motherhood sometimes or feel grief about motherhood and have it all be normal and okay. And so part of that 2 to 3 year time frame is like a huge permission slip to let yourself come undone in this process and take the time that it takes to to become this new person. And I think, in my book, I talk about the phases of matrescence because that's sort of like a leading edge of our understanding of this process. We now know that it exists. But my work has really been about how does it unfold? And two of the kind of key phases, well, the first one is a time of grief and mourning and release and other complicated emotions like ambivalence and anger, and that's normal anytime we are going through any kind of life transition. We're letting go of a former self, and we often believe that grief should be reserved for bereavement, for death. But when you think about it, you are experiencing a death of a former life. And it takes time to reckon with that. Um, this other phase, this next phase that we tend to go through in matrescence is a time of liminality, of this sort of in between, of not, I mean, you may be a mother, you've got a child or maybe more than one child. So technically people would call you mom or mother. Um, but you may not feel fully embodied in that role yet. It might feel really confusing. There's still parts of that ecosystem of your life that feel up in the air. Maybe your career has changed, maybe your relationship with your intimate partner has changed, maybe your relationship with your own mother has changed. The way you feel about your body might have changed. How you feel living where you live may have changed. Like, you name it. There are, a whole cascade of changes that we experience. And there's a lot of time spent in this, I don't know who I am anymore. And I don't necessarily feel like a mother, even though I am one, and this kind of in between. And we need to allow ourselves to experience both of those phases. They're messy and they're very counterculture in the sense that, there's no goals and there's no forward motion and there's no, it's not sexy. And it takes time. And I think the benefit of taking time to truly grieve our former selves and then be in this liminal space is that who we become on the other side is actually more authentic. It's actually kind of closer to who we truly are because we've gone through that grieving process and because we've allowed ourselves to sit in the unknown. And oftentimes that ability to sit in the unknown means that we can really hear ourselves again. And we start kind of gravitationally moving toward who we're becoming in our lives rather than kind of pushing through and like trying to get back to your old self or pushing through to a new normal, because it's uncomfortable, right? It's so uncomfortable being in these kind of this messy middle phase.
Yeah, as a psychologist, I work a lot with emotions, and grief and unknown and uncertainty are some of the hardest things to sit with. So I can see why people, especially with that, and then society telling us to change or go back to who we were, often women don't necessarily go through that process of exploring that. How do you recommend that we do that? Is it first just knowing that it's going to take a while and that we're going to go through these phases? I imagine that awareness is huge, but is there anything else that you recommend that we do as mothers to allow ourselves to feel those things and to move through it?
Yeah, totally. So when it comes to grief, um, I like to say that grief wants to be felt, it wants to be honored, it wants to be metabolized, and sometimes it wants to be released. So that means that, yeah, big permission slip to feel what you're feeling, which is, yeah, you're right, the first step, because in a culture that says that motherhood is a one-tone positive experience, right, a good thing, um, allowing yourself to feel grief over what might otherwise be a positive or wanted thing is huge. And so alongside that comes validating it, honoring it, and saying like, this is normal. It is normal. And it's a normative thing to feel a full range of complex emotions. And it doesn't mean that you're depressed. It doesn't mean that you're a bad mother. None of these things necessarily are true. It means that it's just you're going through a massive transition, right? And so metabolizing is next. And so there's this way in which we've kind of lost the skill to do this, but moving grief through in some way or another. So maybe that's talking to someone about it. Maybe it's moving your body, doing art, writing about it. All of these things can kind of help us to work with it and make meaning of it. And then finally, yeah, sometimes it can be really powerful to release and like give that former self and the trappings of that former self permission to live in the past. And sometimes that can be a powerful thing. some griefs live with us, and some griefs we revisit throughout our lives. But sometimes it's beneficial to consider their release. So that's kind of how I encourage mothers to work with grief. And I will say that, yeah, first of all, we don't have a lot of skills in our culture um, to work with grief. We sort of don't know what to do with it when it shows up on our doorstep. So there's that. There's also a significant amount of privilege associated with feeling grief in motherhood. And it is far easier for say, white, educated, wealthy mother to say, I regret becoming a mother today, or I'm feeling sad today about this, than it is for a mother who may have intersecting marginalizations, who, may be at risk in some way if she shared her true feelings about her experience of motherhood. So I want to name that as being really important. It's not a privilege we all have equal access to. And then with the liminal space, I tend to, so this is how I describe it. It's kind of like if you've ever walked down a dock in the fog and if you look up and you look at the fog around you, it's quite unnerving, right? Because you can't see anything in front of you and around you. And that's very much what the liminal space feels like. You don't really know who you are and you don't know where you're headed. And that's really unnerving in our culture where we're always supposed to know where we're headed. Um, and so the best thing to do is look down at the dock, like you are on solid ground here, right? There is something supporting you. And so that's kind of metaphorically what we do in the liminal space. We, spend some time really reflecting on how you can tend to your needs here and how you can rest here. Ritual can help and has always helped us, since time immemorial to kind of ground us in liminal space. Making space and actually allowing yourself to feel this unknown can be really beautiful because we might be in liminal space, but life keeps lifing, right? You keep going to work. It's not like you're doing nothing. It's just that you feel kind of lost and disoriented. And so actually sitting in that can be really powerful. And there's a few other practices that I recommend, but essentially look at the ground your feet are on, keep it small, keep it daily, and hold yourself in that space because there's a real gift that comes with holding yourself in liminality, which is that ability, as I shared earlier, to really hear yourself again. And oftentimes this is a time when our creativity kind of unleashes, when our intuition is the most strong. And so it has a lot of gifts if we're able to kind of hang in it for a little while.
Yeah, those are really, really good ideas and so tangible and doable. They're not massive, are they? But it takes that awareness and then knowing what you can do.
Totally, totally. Yeah.
So this is such a transformative time. It can be a really challenging time. What can we do if we are not yet mothers? Are there other ways to prepare, like, for
Mm.
this? I know that we have to go through these steps, and you can never fully prepare for being a mother, but
Yep.
I imagine, like, even just reading your book or knowing about the word matrescence would have changed a lot for a lot of mothers. I know it would have for me. What do you recommend that we do ahead of time if we
This is the
can?
best question. I love it. I love it. I often hear this question. So I teach a matrescence apprenticeship program for people like perinatal professionals who are, working with new mothers in any capacity, and want to kind of deepen their understanding of matrescence. And every year, inevitably, I definitely have one person who's like, I'm going to create a program for like a prenatal program so that mothers can be, kind of made aware of what's going to happen before it happens, And I'm chuckling because like I think intellectually, you tell me what you think because I haven't gone through this change, but I think intellectually we can understand it and that's valuable. I think it's really valuable to understand that this is going to be transformative and that's going to take a while and it's probably going to feel pretty disorienting. Um, but beyond that, I'm not sure if we can. And the other program that I teach is called Mothership. That's kind of where the book came from originally. Um, I always also have mothers who are in their late pregnancy when they start the program. And it's really cool and fascinating to see what happens. So we'll always have somebody in the program who has their baby during the program. And inevitably they say, like, I was hearing what you said before this baby was born, but now I understand it and I'm living it. And they often say, like, I want to go back and listen to the recordings of the first classes because I couldn't take it in the same way as I can understand it and integrate it now. So I think it's a great question because I think, like, sure, ideally we would love to feel prepared. And, maybe at the heart of it is that desire to feel prepared for this is also some desire to be able to control it in some way, right? If I can just know what's going to happen and what order it will happen in and when and what I can do to make sure that it happens right, all of these things. Um, and I think that the essence of matrescence is that we surrender a lot of our control and it has its way with us in a lot of ways. And I don't think that there's anything we can do to prevent that. I mean, that's why it's a rite of passage. If we could predict it or control it or prepare for it, it wouldn't be the rite of passage that it is.
Yeah, I really agree with you. I think, like you said, when you first started answering this question, that intellectually we might understand that, but you won't embody it and really feel it, right? Until you go through it. I just wonder if having a bit of that awareness so you can allow yourself to go through that process is helpful rather than fight it. And obviously, there will be moments, even if you know about it, to be like, I don't like this. I don't want to feel this grief or this liminal space and everything else that's coming up. But if you have that intellectual awareness to just know, and this is normal, I think that is the piece maybe we can help soon to be moms have.
Totally. The this is normal thing is, I think, the most important thing. If people listening to this take anything away, it's like, probably your experience is normal, and that's not to say that, of course, some mothers experience postpartum mood disorders, um, and, other challenges along the way. And there's a good amount of this kind of spectrum of experience that is normal, and we just don't recognize it in our culture. No one tells you. It's the anthem of modern motherhood, right? Like, no one told me. Um, and yeah, it's normal. It's probably normal. And there are probably other people who are experiencing it too. And I think that's the gift of that word normal, is that what it says is you belong in the great many other people who are also experiencing some version of the same thing. And I think that's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. What about for those moms who are years into their motherhood journey and they didn't know about matrescence? They didn't know that it was normal to grieve and be lost and shift their identity. What can we do if we're in that situation? If we wish to, I don't know, help ourselves in that moment? Is it learning about this and allowing ourselves to grieve for going through our motherhood experience and not having that support or information? Or what do you suggest for these moms who are further in and just discovering this now?
Yeah. Yeah, I hear this a lot, especially from people who are in my matrescence apprenticeship program, and they're often, well into their motherhood and considering this career change or this new work in matrescence support. And they always say that what surprised them the most about being in the program is that they healed their own matrescence experience in the process. So I guess that's the first thing, is to say that it is possible to kind of heal back in time, back into those early days of our motherhood where we didn't know that this was normal and we didn't know um, that matrescence was a thing. And I think it's just like we have to have so much compassion. I don't know if there's any tips or tricks. other than that, I mean, I think back to even though I had a mentor who told me that the transition to motherhood will take 2 to 3 years, I remember my first baby was 3 weeks early and like surprised the hell out of me. And I remember her being just a couple of weeks old, and she'd go down for a nap and I would clean the house because I hadn't gotten to clean the house before I had this baby. And I remember this like frenzied kind of let me get things organized, or I think it was some kind of a way to um, gain control or a sense of normalcy or something. So even though I had the advantage of the knowledge, um, I still did it. And I just think back to that mom 13 years ago, and I have so much compassion for her. And um, yeah, I think that's all we can do.
Compassion is sometimes the best thing and the only thing, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. Mhm.
So, how do we use our motherhood journey to become powerful agents, powerful change agents in the world? This is something that I read a little bit about you and your writing, and I'm really curious about.
Yeah, totally. Okay. So there's a bit to this, and I want to, share some of the nuance behind it because I think it's important that the conversation generally about mothers and power is complex and nuanced, because here I'm saying that motherhood and matrescence has the potential to be this, deeply empowering, powerful experience. And yet, becoming mothers in the culture we're in is often inherently disempowering. And I think we have a lot of narrative around that. And I think it's important that we do, because we want to make change to the way we raise mothers in our culture. But it's not the only narrative, it's not the only thing. There's a bit of a history of mothers in power, and how our culture sees mothers wielding power or not. Um, and there is this kind of one movement that started in the early kind of 20th century, and it was called maternalism. And maternalism was this idea that mothers were kind of the moral compasses of society, and we were particularly well suited for positions of power because we were raising the next generation. And it was very much about the upstanding humans we were raising, not necessarily about our own subjectivities, right? And then there was this sort of backlash to that called momism, which said, no, 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 motherhood doesn't make you powerful or special in any kind of way. Everyone, every woman, every person can hold power. You don't have to be a mother to hold power. This is great. Okay, this is like our sort of 1980s feminists coming in, our second waves thing, like motherhood isn't the be all end all. That's wonderful. But what happened as a result of momism was that we kind of said, well, like motherhood's nothing special at all. And it doesn't afford you any extra skills or capacities or powers. So we've kind of done this pendulum swing when we talk about mothers in power. And so I want to acknowledge that when I talk about mothering and matrescence as a potentially empowering experience, because we've gone both ends of the spectrum, and there's something in between, right? There's something in between where um, it's we don't hold power because we're raising the next generation and hopefully upstanding citizens, etc. Maybe, but there's also this experience that we have of becoming mothers when we're well supported, and to kind of really move through this as a developmental experience where we unlock these skills and capacities. And I've shared about that sense of interdependence and our ability to kind of de-center ourselves. Like that is how we recreate the village, right? Mothers are particularly good at um, being with paradox and ambiguity. And oh my Lord, is that ever a skill that our culture needs right now, right? We live in such polarized times, and yet motherhood invites us into the middle ground and says, welcome. There's no certainty here. And we become quite skilled at being in that space. I think well-supported matrescence, in this process, we can begin to insource our knowing rather than outsource our knowing. And for many mothers, despite the fact that we have a lot of kind of cultural ideologies around motherhood, there is a potential here for us to become really clear on who we are and what we believe in, and to kind of stop externally referencing our value and our beliefs, um, and really become more true to ourselves. Again, another skill that is deeply lacking in our wider culture that we have the potential to unlock. And in the book, I also talk about these things that I call the mother powers. And the mother powers are, yes, skills and capacities that we have the potential to unlock in motherhood. And they're things like creativity. I mean, it's quite paradoxical because we never have, less time, we're never stretched thinner. And yet, so many mothers have this creative burst. They create businesses, they make art, they write again. Um, Community is one of them. Inner knowing is another one. Ritual is a mother power. We automatically create ritual as mothers, but we really benefit from kind of adding that into our experience as mothers. And there's a raft of other ones. There's 7 of them in total, and um, all of these things they're either kind of handed to us on a silver platter in motherhood, like, here, you have no choice but to learn to be more interdependent because you've got a dependent, right? Or we have this kind of opportunity to kind of take up this skill or capacity, like creativity, for example. And all of those skills and capacities, like, yes, they can help us traverse motherhood with more ease. And maybe they make us, you know, I was trying to say good parents, but I hope that you can see my bunny ears here, my inverted quotes here. They make us better parents. I don't know. Without me trying to kind of overlay this idea of the perfect mother. But they also are skills and capacities that our culture really needs. And in this way, matrescence and motherhood is a counterculture experience. And we've talked about how our culture kind of asks us to deny our motherhood at all costs. And so the very fact of your motherhood is a counterculture experience because you're often swimming against that tide of our patriarchal capitalist culture. Um, and I think there's real power in that. It makes it tough, but I think there's real power in that. And so I'm pretty interested in how we leverage these skills and capacities, not only for our own good and the goods of our families, but for our wider world.
Wow. Yeah, it is so powerful if we can embrace all those aspects. And yet, one of the hardest things to do is to do something countercultural, isn't it? So it's not for the faint-hearted.
No, it's definitely not. And I think pointing to these things and pointing to that countercultural nature can be the first step in a lot of ways because Um, I think so many mothers go through their experience feeling like it's so hard because they're broken, because there's something wrong with them. And so I think identifying that, in fact, it is counterculture, it is hard to be a mother in our culture is the first step. Like, it's not you. It's not you. It's our wider culture. And I think that's really powerful. And I hope that maybe these ideas kind of light a fire under us a little bit. If we have a rebellious streak, then, like, let us speak the truth of our motherhood experience to power in whatever ways that we can, whether that's, being creative in the pockets of the day that we have, or, working to change policy. I think it's really powerful work.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I was ever a rebel growing up or even like as a adult until I became a mother. And then my husband said. He's like, "Well, so you saved all your rebellion for like your 30s? Like, what is going on?" But it makes sense based
Yeah,
on what we go through. And I think I see a lot of mothers embracing that side of themselves.
yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think like even just what it takes to advocate for our children moving through the world brings out a real ferocity. I know it has for me, for sure.
Mhm. So, can you tell us a little bit more about your book? And I'm so excited to read it. Tell us a bit more about it and where we can find it.
Yeah, sure. So the book is called Mother Shift: Reclaiming Motherhood as a Rite of Passage. And well, we've done a really nice job today in kind of covering what I talk about, but I talk about, what matrescence is, and how it's different than what we've been thinking about the transition to motherhood as. Then the first part of the book, I go through the kind of the how that I was talking about. How do we move through this process? What are the phases? And I created a model that sort of describes this experience that mothers go through. And then in the second half of the book, I talk about the mother powers and what they are and how you can cultivate them. Yeah, and then we finish with just like how do you know you are a quote unquote mother? Like, how do I move through this rite of passage and what happens when I'm complete? So that's kind of the overview of the book. I'm really excited. It comes out November 12th. And you can find it anywhere that books are sold, with obvious preference for your indie bookstores. Yeah.
Amazing. So, as a published author now, do you have any tips for people who are budding writers or authors?
Oh boy. Yeah. Do you have a whole other podcast? Yeah. It was a particularly challenging process for me. Like, was that the writing was the easy part. And it was the actual the getting the book deal and doing all of that piece that was challenging. So I have a very unique story to tell about how long it took. And so I think there's two things. I think there's like persistence and showing up for this. I really have always thought about this book like I think about my children. I think about myself advocating for this work and, advocating for this book to come out in the world. And so, being an advocate for your own work, I think, is really important. And when it comes to the writing process, my advice is always to show up for yourself in the same way that you would for your kids. And so even if you don't think you have anything to write, show up to that practice as often as you can and let your muse know that you're there and you're ready for when she's ready to come and give you the words to write, and make a ritual of it. I think that's been a huge thing for me.
Yeah, those are fantastic tips for writing a book or any creative endeavor, right?
Mhm, mhm.
So, where can people find out more about you and your not only your book but your programs that you run? What's the best
Yeah.
place?
Yeah, sure. My website is jessieharrold.com, and you can find links to my books and programs and all of those things there. And social media, I mostly hang out on Instagram at jessie.es.harrold.
Okay, and can you just mention what your two? You said you have the two apprenticeship programs. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I have a program for new mothers. It's a 3 month, it's kind of like another trimester program called Mother Shift. And so that's a matrescence support program. I've been running it since before matrescence was a word in our lexicon. And then I have the Village, which is my matrescence apprenticeship program for perinatal professionals and other people who are really passionate about matrescence and maternal wellness. And that's a
Amazing. These are such important topics. So I'm thrilled that you're doing this work, you're talking about this, and that there's a book out in the world very soon about this because we need more advocating for mothers and for increasing that awareness of this transformative time. So thank you for the work that you do.
Oh, thank you so much.